Welcome into the Train with the Best podcast, a podcast that's bringing high performance to the people. Although in this particular case, we're going to start off talking about how I went to the high performance.
That's
I'm Craig
right.
Hoffman, a high performance coach and media personality.
And I'm Chris Gorres, master trainer and international presenter.
And today we are going to talk about the Olympics from a couple of angles. One, there was a comment by Gabby Thomas on the Today Show, of course, the newly crowned 200-meter queen of the world, three-time Olympic gold medalist in Paris, about the fact that despite running 200 meters faster than anyone else on the planet, she doesn't ever really run a mile, which took a lot of people by surprise. So we'll get into some of the training specificity of that, and that'll be kind of our main topic today. But I did not see Gabby Thomas run the final. I did see Gabby Thomas run the prelims, Chris, because I was there. I was at the Olympics in Paris, and you asked if we could talk about it, and I would like nothing more than to talk about my trip to the Olympics, even though I kind of feel like we're at the point where a lot of people in my day-to-day life want me to just shut up about it.
Right.
So I'm happy to oblige. What would you like to know?
No, I mean, look, that's got to be an incredible experience. Certainly a bucket list experience for me. Looking forward to LA 28 and seeing if we can get there to one of the venues, if not LA, then maybe to Oklahoma for the baseball, softball, since Mila's big in softball, obviously. If we can't get to LA, maybe to get to Oregon for the trials. But like, just what like in your it's. I've always said that it's really hard to appreciate how fast they are until you see them in person, or you see them running next to somebody like you, and then you're like, oh shoot, like that's what a regular person would look like in that heat or in that event. What's it look like up close when you're watching Sydney McLaughlin-Levrone and just pull away from the field?
Yeah, I mean, that was incredible. So we were in the building that night for the 50.37. We saw her break the world record in the final, and just watching her come around that final corner was insane. And it was really kind of funny because there were so many Dutch fans, and Femke Bol is
Femke Bol is amazing. I mean, she ran a 47 in the split and the mixed 4x4. She's the second best 400 meter runner on the planet, hurdles or otherwise. Like it's her, it's Sid, it's her, and then it's everyone else who does those two events. The problem for Femke is that she was born at the same time as Sid, and it was an interesting race to watch in person because Sid got out really well, and the way they were aligned, Sid had Femke right in front of her. Yep.
And so that was like, if I'm Femke, I'm probably thinking like, oh, I don't want her to, like, how long can I hold this stagger?
Right.
And then hope that you can kick home, because she's incredible at that, as we saw in the mixed relay.
Right.
And, they're pretty even coming around the first turn, and they're pretty even coming down the backstretch, and you're going, oh, this is going to be really fun. And then with like 150 to go, as everyone saw on television, like Femke just died.
Yeah.
And I don't think we realized fully at the time yet that Femke had just died, because all eyes were on Sid, and she comes around that corner, and all of a sudden it goes from they're even going into 300 or that third 100 to coming out of it. Yeah. Sid's got Sid's usual lead when Femke's not in the race, and you're like, this is insane. I can't believe she's doing this in the final. Yeah. But it was, what was cool though is, it was cool for me. There's a lot of Dutch fans in the building.
Sure. Yeah.
And so they're going crazy. And all of a sudden there's like this just kind of stunned nature to her coming around, and Femke's not there on her hip, and Sid's got a huge lead. And I just remember screaming, watch the clock. And then we did. And then at 50.37 world record, smashed it. Yeah. Absolutely insane. Pandemonium. I just remember like full, like hands on head. Oh my God, I can't believe she just did that. But I would say on like the relative speed thing, it's almost still hard to appreciate.
It's
like
hard
we were high enough up that we weren't like right there. And you can tell based off the times, but like they're still running against other world-class athletes.
Right. And that's why you can't see the contrast. Right.
Yeah. And so like it is amazing to watch Sid just smoke everybody. And there's so much daylight between her and second place. Nevertheless, I don't remember, or I didn't see Anna Cockrell and Femke Bol cross the finish line, or anybody else. Yeah. I was watching Sid, and I was looking at the clock, And I was like, wait, Anna Cockrell got second? Like, I literally did not see that part of the race.
Yeah.
And there was that much daylight that, like, if you were watching Sid and then watching the clock and everything, you didn't see the other people finish. And that in its own right is remarkable to see that gap. But it's hard still to appreciate the speed because you're not trackside and there's no regular person out there.
And that was my question, right? Is like, it's one thing to see speed, but like to really truly appreciate speed, you've got to have some sort of contrast. Otherwise, everybody looks like they're moving the same, right? Like when you watch NASCAR or racing on television, it's hard to appreciate how fast those things are moving because they're all moving relatively the same. So if one is moving 200 miles per hour and the other one is moving 201 miles per hour, well, you only are going to get to see 1 mile per hour difference, right? So, like,
for sure. Yeah. And like, I'm a huge F1 fan, right? And so like sometimes they take these low speed corners at 80 miles an hour and it's like, well, yeah, it's low speed compared to the 200 or the 170 they do around the high speed corners and the 200 miles an hour they hit on the straightaway. But like, go try to take a corner at 80 miles an hour and have fun careening off a cliff.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, what about like the jumps and stuff? Because I always, on TV, it looks cool because they're like clapping and getting the crowd involved, and we had some pretty good jumpers. There was a high jump competition that was pretty cool amongst the men's. Well, did you get to see any of that?
Yeah, we did. So that same night, that Thursday night, that Sid won her gold in the 400 hurdles. And by the way, I did a 400 meter workout earlier this week, and to think about the times that I was trying to hit in the 80s. And she ran 50.37 over hurdles. Yeah. That's like, it's incomprehensible how fast that is.
Yeah.
But that same night, Tara Davis Woodall won her gold medal in the long jump. Mm-hmm. And what was cool about that is, like, I think on the jumps, like, we actually had pretty good seats relative to that. Like, we were higher up. There's no bad seat in Stade de France. It's an amazing facility, amazing stadium to watch an athletic event in. But we were on the side, so opposite of the back straight of the finish line for the sprints, but we were on the side that the jumping pits were on, and getting to see like just how far they jump, like you get a little bit of an appreciation. It's still hard because you're high enough up.
Yeah.
But to watch her specifically capture the crowd was amazing.
Yeah.
Because for most jumps, like for pretty much every jump, there's some portion of people doing the clap. By the way, Europeans love clapping. They love clapping more than than Americans.
Of course.
I don't know. Americans love apple pie, free, whatever it is that Americans love. Europeans love clapping more. Yeah. But that the clap, and for a lot of the jumpers, it's kind of the people that were down there right next to the pit. You had a similar thing kind of on the other side of the stadium because the javelin was happening.
Right.
And there were certain athletes, and no one had this better than Tara Davis Woodall, who could really just capture the entire stadium.
Right.
And when she jumped, everyone was
watching. Nice.
Bang,
that's pretty cool.
Bang. And it gave you goosebumps. It was really, really cool. And then, her final jump was awesome. She'd already won the gold medal.
Yeah, she
didn't improve, but her like land, get up, fall into the pit was just such a great, entertaining moment. So that was really cool. And then the other stuff that night with the javelin, the Pakistani dude who set the Olympic record twice. Was just unbelievable to watch that javelin fly 90 meters.
That would be really cool to see something like, to see somebody throw that far. Because I know I watch like at an MLB game, if you go early enough and you see the pitchers and they'll do long toss, they'll go from one post to the other post, like the foul post to foul post. And that's pretty freaking impressive.
I don't think people realize how long like a routine throw from third is.
Oh, that's ridiculously far. Far. Like the person looks like a dot. When you're standing on third and where you look at where first base is, that looks like a dot. That doesn't look like a big ass bag, right? That's how far that is. But I'm talking about like in pregame, these guys are doing long toss from foul post to the other foul post. That's pretty insane to watch. But that's with the baseball. So to see that with a javelin, I imagine that's pretty cool to see.
It was wild, and the energy was really, really cool. That was also the night of the Noah Lyles 200, so we saw that. He came out like a maniac, and I'm like, oh boy! And then all of a sudden, he was even at the turn, and then he just couldn't close, and he's the best closer on the planet, and so that was pretty stunning. And then obviously we're quickly like what is happening, because he's down on the track, as everyone saw, and turns out he had COVID, and that was all his lungs had. And he still won the bronze medal, which is
I think for people who don't know Noah Lyles, and they just paid attention to all the media stuff and like him with the yapping back and forth and all that other stuff, which is honestly, like, he did what he was supposed to do. He did what he was trying to do, which is just to get eyeballs on the sport. And for him to run a 19.7, knowing Noah Lyles and the times that he runs, something's wrong with him if he's running a 19.7. I mean, we know that this is a guy that runs 19.31, routinely runs 19.4s, ran a 19.53 at the Olympic trials. For him to run a 19.7, something's clearly wrong. And by the way, like, for the guys that are talking about, like, he's still an Olympic gold medalist in the 100, and he lost the 200 by 0.24 seconds. So, like, if you go get a stopwatch right now, start that stopwatch and try to stop it within 2.24 seconds. Good luck. Good luck at how, and you get a realization of like how fast that really is. On TV, when these guys are moving 25, 26 miles per hour, it looks like it's a huge gap, but 0.24 seconds is really not a lot. So for somebody to run a 19.7 with COVID, I mean, hats off to him.
It's incredible. It's just an incredible feat. I will say, like, one of the comparison ones that's probably the closest we got was the women's heptathlon was also that night in the 200. So, like, we saw the women's heptathletes run the same 200 as the men's 200-meter finalists. And obviously the heptathletes are not the most elite 200-meter runners. Like, they're more balanced athletes. And so you could kind of see it felt obviously slower compared to – actually, I think that was first. So, obviously, it just felt like it was flying for the men that are the literal fastest human beings on the planet at that distance. But then you look at the times of, like, you know, Anna Hall and them are running 22s, 23s, and like, good luck trying to go run a 22, 23 over 200. That's blazing fast.
That's still very fast
in reality. So yeah, it was really cool, man. That night, the Olympics and like the track stuff in general, we went to one morning session where we saw the 200-meter prelims. We actually saw the 110 hurdle prelims and the final. That was the last final of that night. So we saw Grant Holloway win gold. That had the hammer throw, I think it was, that we saw, the prelims and then the 400 hurdle prelims and then the final. So we got to see a nice variety of events, and that, I mean, I want to go to every track meet ever now. Like, I want to go. If you want to go to the trials in Eugene, you let me know.
We're there. We got to call our buddy Nick Simmons and help us ask for some help.
He's disappeared off the face of the internet.
You know what?
I don't know what Nick's doing.
Good for him.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, he made a ton of money, and now he's doing whatever he's doing. But I'm sure if we texted him and we're like, "Hey, buddy, we're coming to Eugene."
Hey, look, you and I talk about this a lot, and you know, part of the reason why I love doing this podcast is because we stay genuine to who we are. We don't go chase content, right? Like, it's tough to make money on YouTube or TikTok or whatever. You have to start chasing content, and whatever you started out with a good idea and you loved. Now you're starting to chase it because you need the consistent clicks and views, and you're doing stuff that you don't necessarily want to do. So I get it. That can be very mentally taxing.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, I've looked it up before. Flights are not easy to get to Eugene. It's very far away. I can almost get to Paris in that time. But it was, I would 1,000%. It's definitely on our list of like events we want to go to, US trials, US championships. We've definitely taken a look at like where some of the world championships are. It was incredible. And then we also got to see some other stuff. We were at the gold medal soccer match where USA women won gold. That was, man, what an experience that was.
Friend of the pod, Mal Pugh.
Friend of the
Swanson now.
Yeah, Mal Swanson. It was actually kind of crazy. So we were also at the semifinal in Lyon, and we had this conversation there. But I was like, it is stupid how many players on this field right now I have interviewed. Because between my work with the Spirit, the work that I do on the radio, and this podcast, I'll see if I can do it real quick. We've had, so if people want to go check it out in the archives, just search Mal at the time Pugh. So you have to search Mal Pugh, but Mal Swanson, Rose Lavelle, I've interviewed. Crystal Dunn was one of our first guests on the show within the first like 5 episodes, I think. Who else? Croy Bethune was on the bench. Hal Hirschfeld, like Trinity Rodman, Casey Kruger. So all the Spirit players. Because also so many of them had gone through Washington. I feel like I'm missing others. Like Sophia Smith, I've interviewed on the radio before. It was when the championship was in DC, and so Portland. Luckily, I knew one of their PR people, and
Did you
I was
never
like, "Hey,
do
can Soph chat?"
like Sonnet?
I did interview Sonnet, when she was here. Not Tierna, not Nay. Now I'm just like going through the starting line. But it's a lot.
It's a lot.
A lot of players, and I feel incredibly fortunate because they're such special people. That sport just produces. And by the way, congrats to the NWSLPA on an absolutely. I don't know if you've seen this news yet this morning.
I did see it. Yeah.
Earth-shattering new CBA agreement. Just an incredible job by Tori Huster and that crew. But anyway, went to the gold medal match. It was awesome. Was at the semifinal where Soph scored that goal and they all dogpiled on her in extra time. That was really fun. We were at the USA basketball semifinal where they beat the tar out of Australia. And I think that was...
Wait, the women or the men?
The women.
The women. Yeah.
The women.
We had
men's
Serbia.
semifinal was a lot more interesting. Wish I was at that one, to be honest. The women just smashed them. And the men had a double-digit deficit going into the fourth quarter against Serbia.
Yeah.
And then
Steph and LeBron. I mean, that was just so cool to watch. And you know what else was cool to watch is in both the men's and women's final for basketball with USA being against France in France, right? Like you have one side literally playing to become national heroes. Like if those guys win that game, if Gabby Williams hits that three and they go on to win that game, there's Napoleon and then there's Gabby Williams in the history of France, right? Like that's what's gonna happen, right? Whereas like the women, and it's kind of sad because like the women and the men, they win and immediately they just start getting compared to, well, they could never beat the '92 Dream Team, or well, these women would have never. Like it's just it's so weird where we are. Where like it was nice to watch with the Olympics where other countries and other cultures just appreciate sport and they don't have to get into this big ass debate over like the small nuances of splitting hairs between LeBron and MJ or Steph and Magic. Like, God, just watch it and enjoy it.
Well, I will say two things on that front. One, the support for any French athlete there was incredible. Like to be, and I
would have loved to be in that pool when Marchand was like doing his thing.
Yeah, I mean the breaststroke when they every single time he pops his head up there, that was insane. But like anytime there's a track athlete introduced that was French, or like the one other jumper that got the same attention as Davis Woodall was the French one. Yeah, like even if they were the last ranked person in the heat, they got a just rousing ovation. It was like goosebump inducing stuff. It was incredible. I mean, at the USA Australia game, there's a lot of French fans there. Yeah. I think because they actually switched the game times fairly late in the game, and there was a lot of people that bought tickets to that thinking they were going to see the French semifinal. Yeah. We actually literally had tickets to the game, sold them because we thought it was going to be the other semifinal, bought tickets to the other semifinal, sold them when they announced the final matchups, and then had to. So we lost a lot of money in processing fees. But there's a lot of French fans there, and there's, allez les bleus, allez les, like during the USA Australia game. It was nuts. So it was just really freaking cool to see that support. And I'm very much hoping that the USA athletes get that experience in 2028.
I thought about that too.
Go ahead.
I thought about that too. Like it's not going to be. Because like there's a level of expectation that the U.S. is supposed to win here, and we've lost an appreciation for those performances, right? Like we've gotten so accustomed to seeing the Sydney McLaughlins and the Simone Biles and the Gabby Thomases that it's like, oh yeah, we just expect them to win. Whereas in other countries they appreciate that more. I hope that it's like that for the United States when they're coming here in LA, but. I don't know.
Yeah.
We'll see.
I don't think it's as special because of the massive success that we've had.
Right.
The other thing I was going to say, though, is speaking of the coverage, because we were over there, we actually did use a VPN and watch some of the Peacock coverage and the NBC coverage. But especially we had 3 hotels between Paris 1, Lyon, and then Paris 2, if you will. And our second 2 had the BBC. And getting to watch the BBC coverage was awesome because they were obviously very slanted towards the Team GB athletes. Sure. But they also like just the I just appreciated the way that they appreciated the games in the same way that you said. And I don't think NBC does a bad job of that,
they did
but it
do a
was
bad
cool
job.
to see. I thought NBC's coverage actually was very well reviewed by like the people that I respect that cover that kind of stuff, the sports media world. But yeah, I really, it was cool to see the French coverage, and I couldn't understand very much of it, basically 98.9% of it. But also the BBC coverage was really cool. And yes, I did get to see Michael Johnson break down track.
Yep.
And I can't believe that he's been working for the BBC for 20 years. What did he do to mess that up? America?
That is the one thing that I was going to add on there is like watching Michael Johnson break down these races and his perspective and the tidbits that he adds. And Otto Bolden's great, but he's not like Michael Johnson is the guy there, I feel like.
Yeah, for sure. All right. When we get back, we will talk about the actual performance of those athletes because that's what we do here. We talk about high performance, and Gabby Thomas, Sha'Carri Richardson, etc. They're really high performers when it comes to the sprints. Ask them to run much further, though, and that's a different story. We'll talk about the why next here on the Train with the Best podcast. So Gabby Thomas won 3 gold medals at the Paris Olympic Games. Her individual event, the 200, and then the 4x100, where she ran the third leg, and then she ran the 4x400 final as well. And so she obviously is doing a giant media tour afterwards, and she was on the Today Show, and she was asked about her training and said like, hey, I don't ever run a mile. We actually run a mile once a year as a gut check. And that caught a lot of people by surprise, Chris, because they just assume like, oh, you're a runner. I remember seeing a clip of Usain Bolt saying something even more extreme not that long ago, which is he's never run a lap. Yeah. Forget a mile. Usain Bolt doesn't run a lap.
Yeah.
And so that catches a lot of people by surprise, Chris. And I do think when we talk about the performance element of speed and of running, the level of specificity is really, really interesting. And there are benefits and positives and downsides to doing all different kinds of things and inserting different things into the training. And we always do talk about how 90% of training for basically all athletes is going to look the same. But I think we should probably dive into that concept a little bit more, because a lot of that has to do with the weight room versus the specificity of what it means to practice, quote unquote, and be on the field, on the court, on the track. So when you heard that comment, what did you think? And kind of what are your general thoughts about the specificity of an elite, literally the most elite, she won the gold medal, athlete at a distance like 200 meters as a track athlete?
Yeah, I think of a couple of things. One, I think that like for you to be that level of anything means like you have to sacrifice other things, right? Like if I'm going to be elite at sprinting, I'm going to have to sacrifice my ability to run long distances, and vice versa, right? Like so there's a little bit of give and take in anything, right? Because honestly, like for you to be an elite sprinter, for you to run that 100, that 200, you have to be so precise. You have to be so perfect in your race and your game plans and executing that game plan that you have to spend so much time practicing that and building the qualities that can get you there, that you don't have time to work on other things, right? And like we know just from studying the body that some of those things are actually detrimental to the qualities that you want to create, right? Like if I want to create speed and power and precision, creating some of that other longevity in running, that's not necessarily what I'm doing, and it's going to take away from my goal here. So yeah, I think whenever you take a look at any type of high performance athlete, right? It's really maybe just the basketball players that can translate into some of the other ones, but especially when you get to like track and field, gymnastics, swimming, diving, those are all disciplines and skills and techniques that are very, very specific to their sport.
Yeah, for sure. Can you expand on the idea of losing certain things versus like if you're focused on X, you might lose some of Y, and like the body element of that? Because I think that's like, obviously I think conceptually people understand like you can't have it all. Right. You can't be the world's greatest power lifter and the world's greatest marathoner and the world, like there's a level of time dedication, but in terms of the actual physical traits and characteristics, like if you train to be a distance athlete, what are you losing as a sprinter? If you train as a sprinter, what are you losing as a distance athlete?
Yeah. So I think the way that you produce power, the first thing that you have to understand is this concept of ATP, CP, and the different energy systems that we use. So for you to be able to develop that, right? That's one energy system that you use for sprinting and lifting and doing all your powerful stuff. And then the other aerobic system that you use is going to be for things where you're running for more than 30 seconds, longer than 60 seconds, right? So when you think of like a hybrid vehicle, right? Like when the Toyota Priuses first came out, like those went 60, 65 miles per gallon, but that wasn't going to race a Corvette, right? You're
Right.
not going to beat Corvette, right? So, and even now, like for those who have gone to the electric cars, you have a Tesla that, all right, if you want to modify your Tesla for performance, sure, but you're going to lose out on a little bit of that battery life, right? So, yeah, it's just the way that energy works, right? We can either use a lot of it right now, or we can use a little bit of it over time and try to be as efficient as possible. And those things are completely different, right? Like sprinting is really an inefficient use of energy when you think about it, because we are trying to use all of our energy right now in this step, in the 44 steps and the 46 steps of a 100-meter race. In a marathon, you're doing the exact opposite of that. So it's very you can't do both. Yeah. So when you're training and you're training to be fast, that's what your time is dedicated to. That's what your lifting programs are dedicated to. That's what even like your movement and stretching and mobility is dedicated to. So like the shoes that you wear are dedicated to that. Everything is geared towards you being able to run 200 meters in 21 seconds or less.
Right. I think it's interesting because there is an element of cross training that I think is obviously helpful and effective. And the way
Yeah.
we think about it specifically in running, I've obviously spent a lot of time thinking about this recently as someone who's doing more running and is training more people that are doing, whether it's running or hybrid events.
Yeah.
And the way I've almost described it for like one of my clients specifically is when we do a track session and we're training for her to be a elite high rocks athlete, so her running will be 1K at a time and her legs are going to be exhausted from the other stuff that you got to do during high rocks. But like we're going to mix in some track sessions, which I'm treating as strength sessions, basically. Like I'm thinking of the track as a weight room.
Yeah.
And it's like we're trying to train the muscles to become twitchier. We're trying to train that element of it and train like a strength, speed, muscle profile versus, hey, we're trying to become better. Like I've literally said, we're not trying to become better runners right now.
Yeah.
We're trying to get stronger. We're trying to get faster. We're trying to become more explosive. And those things will help our running, but your run training is still going to come by doing your distance running. And that I think is a valid way to think about the training of someone who's running for distance. Obviously, most of their stuff should be distance. And if you're already at an elite level, I don't know how much faster you're going to get by working on the sprinting. But if you're a sprinter, it doesn't work the other way. Having a larger aerobic engine really isn't going to help you if your entire race is 10 or 20 seconds, which is what happens at the highest levels of elite athletics at the 100 and 200 meter distances. And frankly, even at the 400 meter distance, an elite aerobic engine is not going to help you at a 400 meter distance because you're still in an anaerobic zone. At a 45, or if you're running over hurdles and you're Sydney McLaughlin 50-second flat race.
Yeah. There is so much truth to that, right? Like it translates one way. It doesn't necessarily translate the other way. But like I would say that they still have an aerobic base. It's just so slanted into the sprinting zone, right? Like they are the equivalent of like the 2.5-second quarter mile drag cars that look like they're like 20 feet long, right? Like that's who those sprinters are. And that's who they are training to be, right? So it's very difficult for them to do other things like run a mile. It's very difficult for them to do things like play wide receiver in the NFL. That would never happen because they don't have the stop and turn and change of direction type stuff that like a Tyreek Hill would have, right? But there's no chance that Tyreek Hill has in racing somebody like Noah Lyles. Because even if Noah Lyles allowed Tyreek to say go, Noah Lyles still wins.
Right.
Like that's how fast Noah Lyles is compared to like a Tyreek Hill. That's how specific his training is. I actually did the math on this, right? Like if you look at his Paris final, he runs 45 meters in 5.18 seconds, right? 5.18. Tyreek's best 40 ever was 4.29 at the combine, right? So if Tyreek has to run an extra 10 yards, it's close that he might not win. He might not beat 5.18. So that, and Tyreek was running off of his own reaction.
That's without a gun reaction.
Without a gun reaction. Noah's was with a gun reaction of 1.78, which is a very bad reaction time for him, actually. So what that means is if they actually do this 50-yard race, Tyreek could say go, and Noah would still probably win, right? Like that's how fast these people are, right? And I think it's easy to see when you talk about the crossover. It's easy to see, right? You look at Simone Biles do what she does, and you're like, I can't do that. You look at the divers do what they do, and you're like, I can't do that, right? And then you look at the runners, and because everybody has access to running, everybody can run. But you just have to understand that like what they're doing is not like what we do when we run, right? Just like Olympic lifters, when they watch NFL guys lift, they look at that like that's not lifting. That's not the same as what we do, right?
Right.
So it's just a different sport. It's the training for it is very different and very unique. And the better you get at it, like the higher you go on that pyramid to get to the top of that sport or that skill or whatever it is, some of the other things just they have to be sacrificed. You're not going to be able to be good. You're not going to be able to stand on the top of two different pyramids at the same time.
Yeah. In some ways, like, I don't know, the times that these athletes run are just so mind bending. Like we were there. It was the 1500 prelims and then the 1500 semis.
Yeah.
We saw Wednesday, Thursday, and watching, or maybe it was the 1500 meter final that we saw. It might have been. But anyway, like because there was multiple heats. So like it's basically a mile and they're running it like 3:40.
Yeah.
Like it's dumb how fast that is. Or the 5K in 12, 13
5K,
minutes,
10K.
the 10K in 30 minutes. Like it is crazy. And in some ways almost more impressive than I've always kind of wondered, like, what's the distance I could run that would be the highest percentage or like the best relative percentage to an Olympic athlete? Like, am I better off trying to run a 200 in 28 seconds, and that is only 100 something percent of the Olympic times versus running a 10K in an hour, and that's 200% of the winning time. You know what I'm saying? Like it is the longer distances and the training that they do to be both as fast as they are and to be able to withstand it over time, in some ways is more mind-bending than a human being running all out 100 meters for 9.7 seconds or whatever it was that Lyles won this particular one at. Nevertheless, Bolt's 9.58.
Yeah. And I think like you just have a level of respect for how amazing these athletes are and what they're doing, right? Like to I would say that it's for, if you're asking the regular person, it's going to be harder for them to sustain the effort, right? Versus like if you told people to run 150% of Usain Bolt's 9.58 record, right? Like that would be hard, but most people would get close.
There's probably a higher percentage of people that could run a 15-second 100,
right?
Than
a 3 minute, than a 3 mile, 3 hour,
like
marathon.
A 45-minute, 10K.
Yeah,
because that's 150% if they're running it in 30.
Yeah,
that's insane.
That's fast. Yeah,
that makes me want to puke. Yeah. When we talk about the training element of this, how do you think about the tipping point of like sprinters versus needing the longer stuff? Because I think for track specifically, like it's almost specific to the event. Like if you're running a 100, the longest you might ever run is like a 200 or a 150. If you're running a 200, you might run some 400s to try to build some more strength in your legs. 400, you're probably running some, like, it kind of just is dependent on your distance. But then when I think about it in terms of non-sport athletes or non-track athletes, like, you need both. You need to be able to summon the high speeds of a sprint versus and be able to sustain it, either the repeatability of like a wide receiver, in football or basketball, you're running up and down the court. Soccer, same thing. Like, it's not just hey, let me trot all the time. It's the ability to repeat high speed running over the course of 2 45-minute halves. Like, how do you think about that tipping point and the balance of the endurance needs of a sport and the output maximal needs of a sport, and how to train those things?
Yeah, I think they're very sport specific. So you have to look at what the sport is. So like in the sport of track and field, you have one heat that day, and then we'll see you tomorrow, right? Like you have to run for 10 seconds, and then we'll see you tomorrow for the next heat, right? So that is not the same thing as a football player who, all right, you run your route, but now you got to get back to the huddle, and then we're running again, and then again, and then again. Same thing with a basketball player, soccer player, right? That conditioning is very, very different. So that's why the top end speed of a guy in the track is going to be 27 miles per hour, whereas a fast soccer NFL guy is going to be around 23 miles per hour, but they can repeat that over and over again. So you take a look at that, and again, like same thing for weightlifting, right? Like in weightlifting, you lift your weight, and then you sit down for 5 minutes, and then you get your next attempt, right? Those are all very, very different. Swimming is the one that you can repeat over and over again, right? Like you see people like Michael Phelps has won so many gold medals. Well, it's also because Michael Phelps is allowed to attempt more gold medal events than a Sid could, right? Like, because if Sydney McLaughlin wanted to, she could run the Open 4. But
yeah, there's a lot of people that wanted it. There was hoping that she would, and she very well might double, whether it's a 400, 200, or the four hurdles are harder schedule wise, but
and that's what
LA 28, like, we'll see.
Yeah, and I think that's the part that you have to look at is like, okay, let's just use Sid as an example. All right, I have to train for the 400 hurdles. All right, that's my one event. I'm going to train for that. And if I wanted to do the 4x4 final, cool, right? But now you have a day in between events. Now let's say you're doing the 4x4 and the 400, the Open 400. Now you have to train for 2 events in a day. So now that aerobic capacity training, now that starts to become a factor. Whereas like before, I was thinking to get you ready for 24 in Paris, this is what we had to train for. We're just going to focus on this. For us to get you ready for LA, if you're going to go for this double, now we have to add some of this stuff in to help you survive the schedule, right?
Right.
Yeah. So like for track athletes, it'd be like surviving that schedule. For a football athlete, for a basketball athlete, it's again surviving that schedule, but also surviving that game itself.
Yeah, for sure. I think that there's also the strength and the conditioning side of it. And obviously we talk a lot more about the strength and like what happens in the weight room. And a lot of the stuff I think is similar in the weight room, the explosive training that you're going to do, a lot of the similar lifts. Like, I mean, everybody's getting, the squats, the deadlifts, and the different variations. And there's only so sport specific that those are going to get. Yeah. But I think that this is a reminder that it's strength and conditioning too. And the specificity you need to be in peak condition to run 100 meters as fast as you can is different than whatever, or is different than a basketball player, even though they both need to sprint. And that is the conditioning side of it. And I think a lot of the conditioning is just going to come in practice, like whether it's the drills that you do, the on-court work, obviously if you're scrimmaging, or if you're, on the track versus in the weight room, how you program those workouts is very specific to getting the adaptations that you want on the conditioning side. And I think that is, this is not to say that actually we've been lying to you for 270 episodes or whatever the hell we're at now, that like 90% of training is the same for all athletes. It's just, this is the part's different. The strength part, largely similar. The conditioning part, very, very different, very, very specific. And the higher up you go on the ladder of eliteness, the more specific it's going to get, right? Because the margins are smaller. And that's the last like part of this to me is, the focus level needed to run 200 meters at an Olympic caliber is so high, and mastering that race and gearing every fiber of your training towards that race that you can't do other stuff. That a tenth of a second is the difference in gold and not being on the podium potentially. And so when the margins are that small, you have to gear every single little thing to that race versus even other sports where it's a little bit less specific because you need to work on your shooting and your passing and your dribbling and your whatever other skills you need. It's a more varied training versus in track, you're really focused like step by step. Like I guarantee you, Gabby Thomas knows the number of steps she needs to run 200 meters.
100%.
And you know, Sydney McLaughlin was talking about after her race, like, oh, if I had gotten this right on hurdles 3 and 4, I would have broken 50. Like the level of specificity is so much greater because it is so singularly focused that from a conditioning standpoint, from a mental standpoint, from a planning standpoint, like that's the eliteness. That's the highest of high performance that the rest of us, frankly, don't even need to worry about.
And I think that's where, like, so let's take running. Okay, so you have running in football, you have running in high rocks, then you have running in track, right? Like these are 3 different things, right? So in high rocks, I think that's where like conditioning matters way more than in the other sports, right? Whereas in football, conditioning matters, but there are decisions and plays to execute in football. It's not just a mindless run 1,000 meters to get to the next event, right? So there's not as much thinking in high rocks.
Right. Your decision making is about your conditioning. Yeah, like how hard do I push?
Exactly, right? And like when you get to the events, like a specific event, whether it be rowing or a throwing event or an event like a 200-meter dash, now that skill becomes so specific because literally 5,000ths of a second is the difference between silver and gold, right? 5,000ths of a second. So when we're talking about that, and you look at every single sport, and this is where I don't think track gets enough appreciation, right? If we look at golf, we look at soccer, we look at basketball. We know Steph Curry practices his shot. We know he shoots however many insane shots a day. And we know that he knows he can look away because he knows when that shot is good and when it's off. We know like a good golfer, a good professional PGA Tour golfer, like a Scotty Scheffler, he knows when he hits the ball if he hit it right or not, right? A soccer player, they know when they strike that ball if that's going to be a good strike or not, right? Track athletes know when they strike the ground, they know if they missed that step or not, right? So when I look at like MLB, when I look at like a Shohei Ohtani, and they do all this tee work, they do soft toss, they do all of this. These are the best hitters in the world. They know when they can hit they know how to hit baseball, but they still hit off of a tee. Think about that, right? All of the A skips, all of the B skips, all of those drills that track athletes do, that is the equivalent of Shohei Ohtani doing tee work, right? Because for them, like you said, I have only got 44 steps in this race. Every single one of them has to be perfect. I can't miss one step because that's going to cost me a 1/100th of a second, which might win or lose me this race, right? So like that's when I talk about. So it's not just the conditioning when it comes to sprinting. It's that skill acquisition of making sure I can hit the ground perfectly with the exact right spot of my foot every single time. And that's a lot of practice. That takes a lot of time. And you're not going to have time to. You can't do that tired. Right. You can't do that tired because now you've lost the ability to execute that skill. When you're tired, now it's just all about survival and thresholds, right?
Right. And, you know, it's kind of a reminder too that, you know, we might do track workouts to get an athlete ready for their sport. And for us, it's maybe a strength builder or speed builder. It's like, it's a weight room session without weights. For them, it's practice. For them, it is skill acquisition. It's a very, very different intention. Which again, like in the high performance world, that intention and the ability to get it across as a coach and to execute it as a coach and ultimately get your athlete to execute it that's the secret sauce to get that understanding and achieve the goal that you set out to achieve. And that's why sprinters don't run miles. All right. We'll be back next week with another episode of The Train with the Best podcast. We bring high performance to the people. Typically, we do it in less time, but we had some fun story time this week. So I hope you enjoyed all of that. If you did, like and subscribe, whether that is on YouTube, if you're watching there, or, of course, in the podcast feed of your choice, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, we're available on all of them. For more from Chris, at Trainer Gorres on Instagram, I'm at Craig_Hoffman, and we appreciate you. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on The Train with the Best podcast.